Just a couple of pieces as we're transitioning that I want to share. We heard a lot of things through that discussion. Through the task force, we are going to be seeking to do more alignment of funding, application, and review processes to continue promoting those large landscape multi-benefit projects, and importantly, to broaden our base of funding. The additional next step I think is really important is how are we looking at planned projects to be able to coordinate better, and really looking through our regional priority plans to help us achieve that. And it's actually really relevant to our next set of panelists who are each developing regional priority plans. The three regional partnerships that are up here today are all recipients or were instrumental in the pilot block grants that you heard about earlier today from Shannon. I will check. Is there anything you wanted to add before we move on? Okay. I also will mention that Heather is graciously joining us from San Diego today and has a flight to catch, so may have to leave early if we end up going over a little bit. In our previous two panels, we just heard how state and federal frameworks are adapting. We heard about expanding our partnerships. Now we're going to focus on a topic that's always been a core part of the task force's mission, which is to tailor our priorities, programs, and projects to the priorities of each region, which necessitates taking this regional approach. So we're going to start with we have three panelists today from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy North Coast Resource Partnership and the RCD of San Diego County. Our first panelist is Brittany Kovich. Brittany is the Policy and Outreach Division Chief at the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. And I'm just going to ask you one question rather than two, just so we can move through it. And my question just relates to what's SNC's role uniquely as a state agency, but also a regional partnership playing this coordination role? And then how do you make sense of all the different priorities and needs that then emerge in such a large region of the state?
Thanks, Forrest. I'm really excited to be here today because a lot of the things that have been covered already are things that we're working on, and it's exciting to kind of have the opportunity to share some updates on the work that we've been doing. We are a state conservancy, one of 10 under the California Natural Resources Agency, and I think in that role, we see ourselves as a regional implementer of the state's initiatives like the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force Action Plan, the National and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, et cetera. So we do that by acting as a regional convener, a funder, and providing technical assistance across the Sierra Cascade region. That region that we do our work in is 27 million acres. It's number 5 up there. And it's a quarter of the state of California. It's really different. You know, Modoc County looks really different from Tuolumne County, from Mono County to Kern County. And the needs and kind of the partnerships that exist across that entire landscape are all very, very different. So to answer your second question, Forrest, how do we kind of make sense of all of those very different needs and priorities? It's a lot, but we're actually kind of set up really well to do this as a state conservancy. Thanks to the encouragement and the leadership of this task force, actually in 2022, the September task force meeting, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy launched our landscape investment strategy, which really kind of outlined how SNC would use our staff and programs to help align state and federal investments and help ready other landscapes for state and federal investment at a larger landscape scale. We tested that with the landscape grant pilot, which you heard earlier about from Shannon with CAL FIRE. SNC contributed $2 million to that. Forest Service contributed $1 million to that, and CAL FIRE contributed $7 million to make that pilot award to the Healthy El Dorado Landscape Partnership. The role that we played there in that landscape grant pilot was really to utilize our regional relationships and expertise to identify landscapes that were ready for that large investment. And we elevated those landscapes that we brought forward for consideration, kind of utilizing this readiness criteria that you see on this infographic. So these are all elements that we see through the work that we've been doing with our collaborative partners as a funder ourselves as being really key elements for success for partners to be able to secure funding and then implement work at landscape scale. So just quick examples, Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions Group in Tuolumne County. They have broad-based support. They've got really good administrative capacity. They've got really strong decision-making. They have been positioned to, thanks to the assessment that they've done across their landscape, they've identified tens of billions of dollars worth of projects. They've been receiving lots of funding for rimfire restoration, and we're in a position to then receive funding for wildfire crisis strategy landscape funds. Same with North Yuba Forest Partnership. A lot of those same readiness elements in place. SNC helped provide a planning grant for the planning and prioritization work that they did that then helped also set them up for wildfire crisis strategy funding. So just those are a couple of examples, and then I'll give another example. We're actually taking these concepts of readiness and we're applying them to our investment decisions that we're making for our regional forest and fire capacity program funds. So for example, number 7 up there, you see that's the Eastern Sierra Climate and Communities Resilience Project, what we like to call the Mammoth Donut. SNC provided an early grant to that group to kind of do community convening and design of that project concept. Through that process, it was identified that there was very little implementation capacity and capacity to secure funding for larger landscape scale work. So when regional forest and fire capacity funds came online for us, we were able to give a grant to the group that was doing work there. They created the White Bark Institute, which has then gone on to secure additional funding, most recently with that $7 million NIFWIF grant that was mentioned earlier. So this strategy that we're really kind of grounding our work in is in this concept of readiness and in elevating ready landscapes, partnerships that have the portfolio, that have the administrative capacity, that have the bandwidth to be able to move these projects to scale quickly. We're elevating those through our regional priority plan and utilizing that regional priority plan to help overlay those landscapes where that partnership readiness exists with the funders' priorities. So if you have a biodiversity priority, if you have a water resilience priority, whatnot, we can overlay those with the partnerships that are ready to take on big funding. And if I can, just 2 quick points on the landscape grant pilot grant that we made to help. So Good Neighbor Authority, if it weren't for the Good Neighbor Authority, we would have had to do 2 grant. Well, it would have ended up being 3 grants to one entity. It would have been a CAL FIRE grant, an SNC grant, and a Forest Service grant. But the Good Neighbor Authority allowed us to pair SNC's funding and the Forest Service's funding to just do 1 grant to that entity. So reducing the burden on our partners.
Great. Thank you, Britton. Exemplifies some of the approaches around that kind of dual focus on implementation where it's ready, but then focus on capacity building and get those other places ready. So thank you for sharing. Our next panelist is Karen Gaffney. Karen Gaffney is the Director of Strategic Planning and Communications with the North Coast Resource Partnership. And North Coast Resource Partnership is probably best described as a coalition, which stands a little bit in contrast to the state agency playing that regional priority planning role. But Karen, can you tell us a little bit more about NCRP and its current priorities? And then I'm very interested in your regional priority plan, which is activated, and how you're using it to track projects, priorities, landscapes, plans, et cetera.
Great. Thank you, Forrest. Good morning, Secretary Crowfoot, members of the Executive Committee. Great to be here. So the North Coast Resource Partnership was formed in 2005, and I know many of you are fairly familiar with it. I won't go into a lot of detail, but it's a coalition of thousands of partners in the North Coast region of California, which is 12% of California's footprint. And the partnership is governed by a leadership council comprised of appointees from the region's 35 federally recognized tribes and 7 North Coast County boards of supervisors. So as far as I know, it's nationally unique in combining sovereign nations with county governments to direct funding and direct strategy for the region. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the implementation of the regional priority plan, which we call the Vision for North Coast Resilience, which was funded by the DOC RFFC program. And what that has allowed us to do is pull together all of the threads of work that we've been engaged in for many, many years. So I'd like to talk about it through the lens of a simplified cycle that we have called the Adaptive Planning and Prioritization Framework, which is basically align, assess, implement, report, adapt, and then run the cycle again, to put it simply. So I'll talk about it in terms of how we are implementing the regional priority plan or the vision plan. First, we use the best available science and data to drive our project prioritization and a portfolio at the landscape scale of hundreds and hundreds of projects, which we now have in a project tracker system. And that use of the best available data and science includes not only regional remote sensing, working with folks like NASA or USGS, and CNRA helped to really support a big expansion of LiDAR coverage for the North Coast region, and modeling and other assessments, but it also includes the integration of local knowledge in a meaningful way, and that includes Indigenous science, TEK, and other forms of local knowledge to get that 1 + 1 = 10 effect, and to really drive the right priorities. So that's one element of how we're implementing the RPP. Another element is our ongoing focus on multiple objectives and multiple benefits, and we really appreciate the emphasis on that by this task force and all of the agencies engaged. So we have about 50 strategies that were developed in our vision plan by working with hundreds of partners throughout the region over a 3-year period. We're now driving them forward really quickly into implementation, and to do that, we're utilizing the downscaling and aligning with the objectives of all of the agencies that are represented here today, as well as philanthropic partners and other federal partners. So for example, we have the CAL FIRE pilot that's implementing a big part of our vision plan. We have 2 grants from OPR, one for climate adaptation planning and one for feedstock aggregation, also implementing the vision plan. We have private foundation funding implementing the vision plan and capacity. So just that ongoing incorporation of the multiple objectives and benefits of the agencies that we work with, and also those funding streams. And all of this is reported on through very robust performance metrics that are also aligned with the agency performance metrics. And so we're constantly tracking what you all are doing in terms of the interagency project tracker, making sure our project tracker is lined up with, reflects that. Potentially, maybe even eventually we'll get absorbed into it. So we're very adaptive and flexible, and we're kind of constantly trying to understand what you all are doing so that we can align with it. And then finally, and I want to give a specific example, one of the things we're implementing very strongly in the vision plan with the DOC RFFC funding is capacity investments. So we are doing a quantitative region-wide assessment of capacity limitations, both through interviews and also through more remotely sensed data and census tract data. We are then doing targeted investments, and we're in the process of developing a region-wide capacity enhancement strategy with our partners in the region. And we have already, with DOC funding, identified a number of capacity investments. So we've provided small capacity investments to about 90 entities, so tribes, counties, RCDs, NGOs, others. And that represented, and that was with funding not only from DOC, but also with DWR funding and funding from private foundations. It was about a $1.5 million investment. Most of those investments were not larger than $15,000 through consultant resources. And the amount of direct project implementation funding that has been leveraged with that investment is $39 million. And it's not just arm waving. It's not just, well, we think it's $39 million that is going to go on the ground as a result of that. So in closing, I think we have, working with all of you, done a really great job of biophysical assessment to understand, fire risk and vulnerabilities, and we're constantly downloading your priorities there. The issue of socioeconomic vulnerability and also capacity and socioeconomic potential is a much stickier wicket. And so we really look forward to working with all of you to understand how we can document that those capacity investments are actually moving the needle, and how big a part of the enhancement of pace and scale that we all want to see out there, what role does that play, and how do we best crank that lever? Thanks.
Karen, thank you. I think it really helped illustrate the role that these regional partnerships can play in translating and making accessible both the priorities and the funding sources in both directions. We're going to turn to yet another example of a regional partnership. Heather Marlowe is the Director of Forestry and Wildfire Prevention Programs for the Resource Conservation District of Greater San Diego County, which I will call the RCD from here on out. But RCDs are really amazing institutions because they have the flexibility of local government, broad missions that allow them to really tackle a lot of different challenges and issues. And Heather and the RCD is a part of a larger partnership of Southern California entities. So Heather, can you first tell me how the RCD of Greater San Diego is involved in wildfire resilience work? But then also, how are you and your partners working together to address region-wide issues in Southern California?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. The RCD of Greater San Diego is a local governmental special district, as Forrest said, and as Karen mentioned, flexibility has really been important for us to participate in this work. So the RCD structure is quite flexible and nimble in comparison to our agency partners, and this allows for us to bring together a wide variety of types of organizations and groups in our region and assess where those gaps are, and then patch in resources and bridge those gaps to further make impact in shared goals. The Southern California region biozone, we are 12, but I'm also representing the Southern Zone. It's unique in that it's richly biodiverse, but also densely populated. And this wildfire resilience is our main focus area. And the need for action in our urban, WUI, and open space communities is intensifying with climate change. The RCD of Greater San Diego County has worked on resilience at the community and homeowner level for many decades to empower stakeholders to take action. One of the ways we do this is with our Community of Fire Safe Council volunteers, but we also work to bring together land managers, private landowners, nonprofits, tribes, and our utility to coordinate larger scale work through collaborative group structures. And as Forrest was alluding to, through our RFFC program, we utilized that opportunity for the first time to be able to align partnerships and planning efforts on the Southern Zone scale. So not only in our area, but in the neighboring areas to the north. Together, the 6 regional partnerships create a mosaic of service areas that represent our region collectively. We utilize and engage this group for convenings, planning efforts, and to develop an investment strategy framework. We're currently finalizing an MOU that will solidify this partnership as the Southern California Wildfire Resilience Partnership. The structure and sub-regional working groups will prioritize and put forth shovel-ready projects for implementation through block grants. Shannon did a great job of illustrating that point already. We developed this structure to coordinate and include several other aligned efforts and research, and it's important to note that we all participate in the Southern Montane Forest Conservation Strategy Working Group and the Southern California Ignitions Reductions Project. Some of us also have groups such as Coast and Fire Safe Councils that will be involved in utilizing CWPP documents, and others that are utilizing CAL FIRE unit plans and Forest Service 5-year plans. And with this new CAL FIRE landscape pilot block grant, the RCD will utilize its flexible, nimble structure to expand our local model to the Southern Zone scale. We will be the block grant administrator for the region and facilitate a steering committee, and we will sub-grant project awards to each of the organizations for implementation.
Heather, thank you so much. And in total, I'm just really impressed with all the different approaches and really to regionally tailor how you're approaching the work to get success. So I will turn it over, and we have until the end of the meeting, plus any time for wrap-up comments for discussion.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much for your leadership and well-organized panel in that regional leadership can look different in different places of the state. Maybe a couple of questions for whoever wants to take this. One would be, are you engaged with either other conservancies, other coalitions, or other RCDs across the state, and like peer-based learning in terms of like, hey, how are we navigating this new paradigm of wildfire funding and wildfire support, number one. And then number two, if you had a magic wand, what would you improve? How could we improve from the agency sitting up here in terms of supporting your work?
They know I always like to talk. Great questions. In terms of supporting our work, I think what you've shared already today, the idea of, bringing together multiple funding streams into the watersheds of our regional collaboratives, it's really a partnership made in heaven, really, because I think there's huge economies of scope and scale that can be achieved and a lot of efficiencies. So I think we're very supportive of that. And then
And Karen, candidly, do you feel like that's happening? Do you feel like you're sensing our intent? Do you feel like that is actually starting, that state and federal agencies are coming together and kind of approaching you in a more unified way?
I do. I mean, you all know I've been in this space for a long, long time, and I think the evolution of the state government in California, as well as the collaboration between the state and federal government, has been really significant, and very excited that it can continue and want to see it continue. And I think if anything, the advice would be, as Director Wright was saying, how can we institutionalize some of these things that they're more than conceptual, you're doing them. I also think that a lot of that impetus towards aligning with and downscaling and integrating with state and federal objectives is coming from the regions. And so I would ask you to continue supporting that kind of two-way flow of information and supporting the capacity for the regions to do the work of identifying what's out there and trying to bring it into the tributaries of funding.
I would say that, as we did the landscape grant pilot program, we learned a lot of lessons. I mean, just going through the process was really helpful for us to kind of draw out what are the challenges with pooling funding or making joint funding decisions. And with some of those, some of them are linked to the kind of ties on the funding, right? You have some limitations with how long the funding can go out, or you have limitations there. But there's also some challenges and limitations associated with internal policies and processes that, we could definitely work on. And having the task force kind of continue to encourage this opportunity for all of us to work together and kind of figure out where we can align and what we can kind of untangle to make it easier for our partners on the ground, I think would be wonderful.
I think those are all really great. And I want to point out too, in the southern region, those 6 partnerships include conservancies, 2 RCDs, a nonprofit. So we have very diverse makeups, and we've learned a lot from each other and continue to share resources and learn as we all do together and learning how to track and develop projects. But it's been a great resource to have that small collaborative of diversity and learn so much from each other. And I really appreciate the trust that these systems have given us to have local input fed up. So thank you.
I'm up. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Valerie and then Sam.
Go, Valerie. Yeah, okay. All right. So I want to make sure you get your voices in here. All of you touch base a little bit on the capacity building and how it sounds like you're dedicated or devoting certain portions of whatever fund budgets that you have to you had readiness assessment. I think your align, assess, that one. Heather, I know you have one as well. How is that working? How, not successful so much isn't the right word for it, but how much of your time or energy is spent on building up, getting other partners ready to receive the larger scale funding and be ready for that success? And then Karen, my second one, I got a 2-part too. A little bit off of what Wade said, how can we do better? You said a couple times in yours, we're trying to keep up with what you're doing. Task force, what do we need to do differently? If there's a communication or some other type of way when you say, well, I'm trying to keep up with you, any advice for us as a task force that we need to think about differently so you're not trying, close the gap on the trying to keep up. So anyone could start.
Well, since I'll answer the second question first, just by saying, I certainly did not intend that to sound like a negative. I don't think it's a negative. And I don't think
Didn't
you're
take
saying
it,
it that
yeah.
way. But I think the fact that the state and federal relationship and the state as an individual and the federal government as an individual entity are evolving so quickly in such positive ways, and frankly have had so much funding that there is a quick, it's like, I'm an ecologist by training, so I'll use the example of trying to keep up with a virus, we're just constantly iterating with one another, and that's a good thing. I think the only area where there might need to be some more continued investment, not more investment, is that basic infrastructure of the regional collaboratives to track, to meet, to connect, and getting to your question of, are we affiliated with other, learning opportunities and RCDs? Yes, very much so. But there does need to be some base funding for us to have that interaction. And then what we're finding kind of as a fractal is that our entities that we work with also need that base funding, whether they're an RCD or a tribe or whatever, to interact with us to help us be the synchro with you. So there's something structural there that needs to stay in place for us to continue to work well together. And then capacity, it's a big part of what we do. We think all the time about, like, should that be the bigger part? How much is implementation? How much is capacity? We do try to make the capacity assessments as quantitative as possible. We try to use both remotely sensed data, interview data, and then now we're doing kind of a cluster assessment, because as you can imagine, Trinity County capacity is very different than in Sonoma County. So we want to get an understanding of what actually exists out on the landscape in terms of funding and resources.
I'll add on to that, I think capacity building, probably like my colleagues here, is really in our DNA. We spend a lot of time and energy focused on how can we build capacity of our partners to be able to do this work faster at larger scale? What do they need in order to do that? I think one of the things that has been really exciting that we have experienced recently is just going through that landscape grant pilot process and identifying those readiness criteria. We kind of took those readiness elements, and when we made our next round of regional forest and fire capacity program investments, we used those to kind of go to our partners and say, okay, these are things that, we're seeing as key for people to be successful, to be able to work at scale. What do you have? What do you need? And then we kind of customized those investments to be able to give them the things that they didn't need or the areas that they needed to strengthen. So, for example, things that we heard from people were, well, we don't have enough accounting professionals to be able to take on more invoicing. Okay, well, then we'll give you some support to help you with that invoicing that you need to do in order to be able to go for larger grants or more grants, or be able to pool more grant funds together. Or grant writing assistance. We need grant writing assistance. Okay, we can help you provide technical assistance of helping you to write a grant so that you can actually bring in all of your other partners and think about your project and then write your grants so that you're pulling in all of those different partners and those needs in such a way that you can write a successful landscape grant proposal. So I think if we're looking at playing that kind of alignment of capacity and implementation funding role over the long period, like that's a niche that regional entities like us can play to help build that capacity and connect with those larger landscape needs.
And I'll just let you know we're at time, but I'll definitely leave it up to you.
Just very quickly, Karen, so first of all, your organization is, I think, one of the best in terms of what Forrest said, coordinating across regions and then connecting the dots. And that we've seen it in some of our engagement. My question is still on the capacity, because that's what we're hearing again and again and again, whether it's grant writing or counties that have, different capacities to even access that. How much work are you doing with philanthropy relevant to that? Because what we're hearing as we're engaging with philanthropy now more and more is that's the area that they're interested, quite a few of them, in terms of supporting. Is there anything you can shed light on that?
Yeah, we're expanding our relationships with some philanthropic organizations. So for example, With funding from the Humboldt Area Foundation, we recently did a very in-depth capacity assessment of tribal and rural fire departments in a subset of our region. And the lessons that we learned from that, it was a very quantitative assessment. We then used that to target investments of about $400,000 into those rural and tribal fire departments to raise their capacity. And now we're using that same assessment tool and we've expanded it for the whole RFFC region and using DOC RFFC funding to expand that tool. And we're just now in the process of, we've put it into ArcGIS 123. And we are in the process of asking some of our key partners and peer reviewers to look at that capacity assessment tool and including DOC and other partners and help us kind of update it and make sure it includes the right questions.
Excellent. Well, huge thanks to you all on the panel. I know there could have been, any number of leaders from these regional efforts speaking here today. And so thanks for representing all the good work that's happening across the state.